Picture carrying a secret so heavy that only one other living person on Earth ever knew the truth of it. Now picture that person dying 2 months ago and realizing, for the first time in 60 years, that you no longer have to carry it completely alone. That was Emmett Alwood's exact situation, walking into a television studio in Bakersfield, California. On a Friday morning he thought was just going to be a fun outing with his grandkids. He had no plan to say anything at all. He'd tell you that himself, if you asked him now. By the time he finished speaking, Steve Harvey would walk off his own stage without saying another word. The Alwood family arrived at the taping the way most families do, a little nervous, mostly excited. Emmett's wife Estelle fussing over his collar in the hallway the same way she'd fussed over it 55 years of Sunday mornings. Emmett, 88, stood at the podium with Estelle, his granddaughter Priya, and his grandson Elias, all 4 of them laughing about something Elias had said in the van on the way over. Priya, 24, worked as a paralegal and had a habit of noticing details other people missed, a trait her grandfather always joked she'd inherited from him back when he still had a trade that rewarded careful attention. To every camera in the building, they looked like exactly what they appeared to be, a warm, easy family enjoying a good day together. Steve greeted the family warmly at the top of the show, the way he greets every family, immediately taken with Emmett's sharp wit and easy laugh. 88 years old and still quick as anybody up here, Steve said, shaking his hand. What's the secret? Oh, I've got a few of those, Emmett said, laughing, in a tone that sounded, to everyone in that moment, like nothing more than an old man's harmless joke. Nobody in that studio, including Steve, understood yet how literally true that sentence actually was. Across the stage, the Delacroix family from Bakersfield waited their turn. 4 cousins who'd entered through the regular casting line and had no idea they were about to spend most of their taping day as quiet witnesses to something far bigger than the game. 60 years ago, Emmett Alwood was 28 years old, working the night shift at a textile mill outside a small town 3 states away from where he lives now. His closest friend at the mill was a man named Roy Hendricks, a co-worker 2 years younger than Emmett with a wife and a newborn daughter at home, and a mortgage he was barely keeping up with. Emmett and Roy had worked the same line for 3 years by then, close enough that Roy had asked Emmett to be his daughter's godfather just months before everything fell apart. One night, running behind on a rushed order, Roy made a shortcut decision on a piece of equipment that both men knew violated safety protocol, a decision that led, within the hour, to a fire that tore through a storage section of the mill, destroying nearly a third of the building and seriously injuring another worker who'd been nearby. That worker, a younger man named Frank, recovered fully within a few months, though Emmett says he thought about him often during his 14 months inside, grateful at least that the injury hadn't been permanent, that the cost of the mistake hadn't been worse than it already was. Roy came to Emmett before the investigators arrived, terrified, already imagining the wife and baby he'd be leaving behind if he went to prison for negligence, already certain his career and his family's stability were over before either had really begun. He didn't ask Emmett to lie for him. Emmett has always been clear about that part. Roy simply sat on the curb outside the mill, shaking, saying over and over that he didn't know what he was going to tell his wife. Emmett, single at the time, with no wife and no children depending on him, made a decision in about 90 seconds that would shape the rest of his life. He told the mill's investigators that he was the one who'd made the shortcut, that Roy had nothing to do with it. He repeated the same story to the police, to the insurance adjusters, and eventually, in a small courtroom, to a judge. Roy tried to argue with him twice that same night, and once more the morning after, insisting he couldn't let Emmett do it. Emmett told him, plainly, that a baby needed her father more than a mill needed the truth. Roy never brought it up again after that, though Emmett says he could see, for years afterward, exactly how much it cost his friend to stay silent too. He was convicted of criminal negligence and served 14 months. He lost his job, his standing in a town where everyone knew everyone, and any hope of finding factory work anywhere within driving distance ever again, since word travels fast in a small industry. He remembers the judge, an older man with tired eyes, pausing before sentencing to ask if he had anything to add. Emmett said no. He'd rehearsed that single word for a week, terrified that anything more might let the truth slip out in front of Roy, who sat 3 rows back, unable to look at him. When he got out, he left that town entirely and never went back, starting over 3 states away under circumstances nobody in his new life ever fully understood. He met Estelle 2 years later at a diner where he'd taken a job as a cook, having quietly walked away from the trade he'd trained in his whole life. He never told her the real story, only that he'd made mistakes in his 20s he wasn't proud of and preferred not to discuss. She married him anyway, fully aware there was a locked room somewhere inside him she wasn't allowed into, deciding, at 24, that she trusted the man in front of her more than she needed the answer to a question he clearly didn't want asked. Estelle, in the early years, occasionally asked gently, and each time watched him close a door behind his eyes that she eventually learned not to knock on anymore. Roy, for his part, kept his job, kept his family, and built the stable life Emmett had sacrificed his own reputation to give him. The 2 men spoke exactly twice more in 60 years, both times briefly. Both times carrying an unspoken debt neither of them ever found the words to fully address. The first of those calls came a decade later, Roy simply saying thank you, voice thick, before hanging up quickly like he couldn't trust himself to stay on the line any longer. The second came 30 years after that, a birthday call that turned, without either man planning it, into 40 minutes of silence and half sentences neither of them finished. Roy died 2 months ago. Emmett found out from an old coworker's obituary notice, forwarded by someone who didn't even know the history between them. Something about reading that name in print, after 60 years of silence, cracked something loose in Emmett that he hadn't expected. Emmett kept one thing from that entire chapter of his life, a yellowed newspaper clipping from the week of the fire, folded into quarters, tucked at the bottom of a drawer in his workshop where Estelle rarely looked. The headline read simply, Mill Fire Injures 1, Employee Negligence Cited. His own name appeared in the 4th paragraph. He'd kept it for 60 years without ever once being able to explain, even to himself, exactly why. Punishment, maybe. Proof, maybe, that the version of events he'd told the world had actually happened, even if it wasn't quite the truth. He'd taken it out and read it exactly once a year, every year, on the anniversary of the fire, alone in his workshop with the door closed. Estelle had noticed the yearly ritual decades ago, and had learned, the way spouses eventually learn the shape of things they aren't invited to ask about, to give him the evening alone without comment. This year, packing for the trip to the taping, he'd slipped it into his jacket pocket without fully deciding why. The same restless instinct that had been sitting in his chest since Roy's obituary landed in his inbox 2 months earlier. He told himself, driving to the studio that morning, that he was simply bringing it along for no particular reason. Some part of him, he admits now, already knew that wasn't true. Round 1 went well. Priya answered 2 questions sharply, and Elias got the crowd laughing with an answer about things people do at a car wash. Emmett played easily, present and sharp, giving no outward sign of the folded newspaper clippings sitting against his ribs. Estelle noticed anyway. 55 years of marriage teaches a person to read the smallest shifts in someone's posture, and she'd caught the way his hand kept drifting toward his jacket pocket between rounds, the same gesture she remembered from every anniversary of a date he'd never once explained to her. Between rounds, Steve, always curious about the families he hosts, asked Emmett a casual question about his working life. "What'd you do before you retired, sir?" "Cook, mostly," Emmett said. "Diners, mainly, 40 years of it." Always wanted to cook? Steve asked, making easy conversation. Emmett paused, just slightly, in a way that might have gone unnoticed on any other day. No, he said. I trained for something else entirely. Life had other plans. Something in his voice had shifted, subtle but unmistakable to anyone paying close attention. Priya glanced at her grandfather, catching the change too, though she couldn't have named what she was sensing any more precisely than that something in the air around him had gone quiet. Steve, who has learned over the years exactly what that particular shift in a person's voice usually means, set his cards down. You want to tell me about it? He asked quietly. Emmett looked out at the audience for a long moment, then down at his own hands, weighing something the studio couldn't yet see the shape of. That wasn't the part of the morning that would end up mattering most. Not yet. Emmett looked at Estelle for a long moment, then at his grandchildren, then, finally, pulled the folded newspaper clipping from his jacket pocket. I've been carrying this for 60 years, he said. Never told a single living soul the whole truth of it. Not even you, Estelle. I think it's time. Estelle's face went pale, though she reached for his hand anyway, steady, the way 55 years of marriage teaches a person to meet uncertainty without flinching. Emmett unfolded the clipping carefully, the creases worn soft from 6 decades of handling. This is from a fire at a mill I worked at when I was 28, he said. Says right here I caused it through negligence. Says I put a man in the hospital and cost the company 1/3 of their building. He paused, throat working. None of that's true. I didn't do it. My friend Roy did. A good man, a careless mistake, the kind anybody could make on 4 hours of sleep. He had a wife and a new baby and everything to lose. I had nothing waiting for me at home. So I told everybody it was me instead. The studio had gone completely silent. Even the crew, usually moving quietly in the background regardless of what was happening on stage, had stopped entirely. I did 14 months for a mistake I never made, Emmett continued. Lost my trade, lost my name in that town, had to start my whole life over from nothing 3 states away. Roy kept his family, kept his job, built a whole life because I let the world believe a lie for 60 years. Priya's hand had found her grandfather's shoulder without her quite deciding to put it there. Elias sat frozen, 16 years old and abruptly understanding that the grandfather he thought he knew completely had an entire hidden chapter he'd never once glimpsed. What Emmett said next, nobody in that building was ready for. Roy died 2 months ago, Emmett said, voice finally breaking. And I realized I was the only person left alive who knew the truth. I've spent 60 years wondering if I did the right thing, giving away my own name to save his. I still don't fully know the answer. But I know I can't carry it alone anymore. I wanted my family to hear it from me, not find some old article after I'm gone and wonder why I never said anything. He looked at Estelle. I'm sorry I never told you. I was ashamed of the conviction, even knowing the truth behind it. Shame doesn't always care about the facts. Estelle, tears streaming freely now, brought his hand to her lips. 55 years, she said. And you're still the most honorable man I have ever known. This doesn't change that. It proves it. I used to wonder, some nights, what you weren't telling me, she admitted. I stopped asking because I trusted that whatever it was, you had your reasons. I just never imagined the reason was this big, or this good. Priya, still gripping her grandfather's shoulder, finally found her voice. Grandpa, this is the bravest thing I've ever heard anybody say out loud. I don't care what that article says. I know exactly who you are. Steve Harvey stood completely still for a long moment, staring at the folded 60-year-old clipping in Emmett's hands. He didn't say anything right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet in a way the studio had rarely heard from him. I need a minute, he said. I mean that. Give me a minute. He set his cards down on the podium, turned, and walked off the stage entirely, disappearing through the wings without another word, leaving 200 people and an entire crew watching a host who had never once, in 15 years, done anything like it. For nearly 90 seconds, nobody moved. The Alwood family stood together at center stage, unsure whether to follow, unsure what came next, simply holding on to each other. The Delacroix family, watching from their own podium, had gone completely still too, one of the cousins whispering to another that she'd never seen a host actually leave the stage before, not once, in years of watching the show. Backstage, a producer found Steve standing alone near a prop cart, one hand braced against the wall, taking slow, deliberate breaths the way a person does when they're trying not to fully lose composure in front of a room full of people relying on them. "You good?" the producer asked quietly. "Give me 30 more seconds," Steve said. "I've just never had one hit me exactly like that before." When Steve finally walked back out, his eyes were red, and he made no attempt to hide it. "I had to step away," he said, "because I did not want the first thing you all saw be me falling apart before I'd even had a chance to think about what to say to you." He walked straight to Emmett and took both his hands. 60 years, Steve said. "You gave a man your whole life so his family could keep theirs. That is one of the most selfless things I have ever heard sitting in this chair. And I've heard a lot of things in this chair. Let me tell you something," Steve continued, addressing the whole room now. "This man was never guilty of anything except loving his friend too much to let him lose everything. The system called it a crime. I'm calling it the most expensive act of love I have ever personally witnessed." He looked back at Emmett. "You didn't just save Roy's family 60 years ago. You just gave your own family something they'll carry the rest of their lives. Proof of exactly what kind of man raised them." The Delacroix family, still standing at their own podium, had long since stopped thinking about the game, several of them wiping their eyes along with the rest of the room. The crowd rose slowly to its feet, applause building not in the quick, excited way of a game show moment, but steady and deliberate, the sound of 200 strangers who understood they'd just witnessed something they wouldn't be forgetting anytime soon. A stagehand near the wings, normally invisible to the whole production, found himself openly wiping his face, no longer bothering to hide it either. The game resumed gently, though nobody's heart was fully back in the trivia after that. Priya, holding her grandfather's hand through the rest of the taping, told him afterward that she'd never been prouder to share his name. Elias asked, quietly, whether Roy's family knew the truth now too. Emmett said he intended to write Roy's daughter a letter that very week. The same daughter Roy had been terrified of losing 60 years earlier, now a grown woman with grandchildren of her own. He did write that letter. It took him 3 drafts and most of a weekend, the same careful deliberation he remembered from the one time in his life he'd had to choose exactly the right words, at exactly the right cost. Roy's daughter, reached weeks later, said she'd always sensed something unspoken behind her father's occasional mentions of a debt he could never repay to a good man. She finally understood exactly what he'd meant, decades after first hearing him say it. She told Emmett, in her first letter back, that she remembered her father crying alone in the garage every year around the same date, never explaining why. The family simply learning to give him that evening without questions the same way Estelle had learned to give Emmett his. Neither family, it turned out, had ever known the other kept the exact same yearly ritual of quiet, unexplained grief, decades and states apart, tied to the same single night. She and Emmett have spoken twice since, on the phone, both times ending in tears on both ends of the line, both of them filling in 60 years of a story that had only ever existed as half-truths on either side. She's planning to visit him and Estelle this summer, bringing her own children along, 3 generations meeting because of a fire that happened decades before any of them were born. Emmett keeps the newspaper clipping in a frame now instead of a drawer, no longer something to hide but something to remember honestly, the whole truth finally attached to it instead of just the printed lie. He says the anniversary of the fire feels different this year, lighter somehow, though he suspects some part of him will always mark that date quietly, out of habit if nothing else. Estelle has started asking him gently about the other small unexplained things from his 20s he's mentioned in passing over 55 years. He tells her he's got nothing left as heavy as that one. She's not sure whether to fully believe him yet, though she says she's willing to keep asking, now that she knows he's finally willing to answer. Elias, 16 and still processing the whole afternoon in his own quieter way, told his grandfather a week later that the story had changed how he thought about courage entirely, that he used to think it looked loud, and now he understood it could look like 14 months of silence instead. If today's story reminded you that the truth sometimes takes a lifetime to find the right moment, you already know what to do with that feeling. Stay close. Somewhere on this stage, there's always one more story that's been waiting a long time to finally be told.
Paspin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi makhj zama pat paspin ka panashi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi sabar ba mizrasta da didan shi اسه با خراب د مینې خوان شي صبر با مې زړه ستا د دیدن شي مخ چې زما پټ په سپین کفن شي مخ چې زما پټ په سپین کفن شي صبر با مې زړه ستا د دیدن شي صبر با مې زړه ستا د دیدن شي د برباد عبدل زرین کړما اسه د برباد عبدل زرین کړما اسه د برباد عبدل زرین کړما په आवाज د خالد شاه مزړه پیوان شي صبر با مزړه ستا د دیدن شي مخ چې زما پټ سپین کفن شي مخ چې زما پټ په سپین کفن شي صبر با مې زړه ستا د دیدن شي صبر با مې زړه ستا د دیدن